And so I encourage everybody to take those seats or take one of those seats. I am, and I believe, how many people do we have on Zoom?
43.
We have 43 people joining us on Zoom. And this is indicative, I think, of interest in the topic and the story, and also indicative of the skill and overall talent of our speaker. I am not going to do a formal introduction because I think most people know Dr. Ed Halperin. I do want to say, and Sharon, you are here as well, this is a tremendous story that many of you know ran on the front page of the New York Times. By the way, I just want to confirm, Jody, can you confirm that people on Zoom can hear? Somebody should just confirm that they can hear. Excellent. It was a story that ran on the cover of the New York Times. It is something really that I feel tremendously honored to have been a part of, that was deeply moving for hundreds and hundreds of people who were present when we buried the ashes in our cemetery, and that raised a lot of questions. And I'm very excited for Ed to share how this story has continued to unfold even after we laid the tablet to rest many years ago. Ed.
Thank you, Rabbi. Evening, everyone. Evening to the people on Zoom. And I wagered, Sharon, that 5 people would come. For the people on Zoom, I couldn't figure out whether I was being discourteous to the people here by sitting over there and then no one would see me because I'd be behind them, or whether it was better off here. So I decided I'd face the audience that was here. The subject I want to talk with you about is the development of new scientific evidence, which has very much changed the story I told everyone in Durham in 2014 about the Dachau ashes, which we had analyzed and we had buried. And the story I'm going to tell you is a lot more complex and a lot more sinister than I appreciated originally. And for those I haven't met, my name is Edward Halperin. I'm the Chancellor and CEO of New York Medical College in Valhalla, New York, and a professor of radiation oncology, pediatrics, and history, and I hold the chairs in biomedical ethics after the Holocaust. New York Medical College is part of Touro University. Some of you will not be familiar with these names, but they're relevant to the story I have to tell you tonight. So I'll take a half a minute and tell you what these places are. New York Medical College is one of the oldest health science universities in the United States. It was founded in 1860. Now we have a medical school, a dental school, a podiatry school, a graduate school, a school of health professions, and a nursing school. If there are any New Yorkers listening or here, this is Flower Fifth Avenue. Or to pronounce it correctly, Flower Fifth Avenue. Touro University was founded in 1983. It has undergraduate schools, graduate schools, and professional schools. It is about 3.5 times the size of Yeshiva University, about 4 to 5 times larger than Brandeis. It is the largest university in North America under Jewish auspices. And besides where I work, I don't have any conflicts of interest of any financial sort in what I'm about to tell you. We're going to be talking about artifacts of a concentration camp. It's worth starting with where did those two words enter the English language. They're a contribution of the Brits. It is British. In the Anglo-Boer Wars of 1899 to 1903, Queen Victoria's army is increasingly frustrated by the resistance of the Boers, of the Afrikaners on the tip of Africa. The Afrikaners have their own states, the Cape Colony, the Orange Free State, the Transvaal, and they're driving the British Army nuts. They cannot be subdued. They fight a guerrilla warfare, and they know the territory, and the Brits do not. In this French cartoon making fun of British gallantry, the British come up with a solution. We will incarcerate the Boer women and children. We will make the men stop fighting. We will concentrate the women and children in camps, thus the first concentration camps for Boer women and children. This one looking rather modest, but you can see the size of these tent camps in South Africa. While the British are never accused of anything equivalent of gas chambers or mass shootings, the food supplies are abysmal in these camps. You can see this starving child with the child's mother. And there are estimated to have been 25, 50,000 deaths of Boers in these camps. And don't think that Hitler didn't know all about this. He did, and he made reference to, why are you criticizing me? The British invented these. It is from this concept that we end up with German concentration camps and killing factories. The territorial changes of Germany with the rise of Hitler in 1933 until the onset of the war in 1939, or German takeover of the Rhineland of Czechoslovakia, the Anschluss with Austria. And as Germany expands, an active program of incarceration of Jews, political prisoners, Roma occurs. And then with the onset of the war, Russian prisoners of war. While there are a group of well-known concentration camps, Majdanek, Auschwitz, Orangeburg, Bergen-Belsen, and in southwest Germany, Dachau, we are continuing to learn of the enormous number of camps, sub-camps of the concentration camp system. Dachau, as I said, is in southwestern Germany, is one of the earliest ones because it is on German territory, not Polish territory. It has access to rail lines. And for the people who have visited, I have not, I am told that it's in a residential area, that people were in houses nearby and could see the walls and could see into the camp on the east side of town. The entrance to Dachau is the same as the entrance to Auschwitz. Arbach macht frei, work makes you free. The United States Army enters the camp in April 1945. We have extensive photographs from those first few days, stacks of bodies in rail cars, shower. It is one of the rare episodes of loss of command and control of the United States Army. An officer lines up SS guards and opens fire on them until a colonel runs there to put a stop to it. And we have various reports of military historians of the liberation of Dachau. There are crematoria ovens which are demonstrated to the Army, the smokestack of the crematoria. I'm sorry, I'm in your way?
No.
The Army finds gas chambers, storage rooms for the gas, and living skeletons. The prisoners, knowing that the army is arriving, have broken themselves up into national groups. And the US Army is greeted by an assortment of makeshift flags of the various national groups. And we see recent prisoners and prisoners with the army, those who were capable of walking. And among the people who visit the camp early is Walter Corsby Jr. He is originally in the Air Corps, but he's found to have a heart murmur by an Army doctor and is given a desk job. He's from Western North Carolina. He's an addressograph repairman. Remember addressographs? Mr. Corsby, for mass mailing, Susan, metal plates and you'd run the envelopes through them before printers and addressograph. Mr. Corsby is a smoker, and he reports that on visiting the camp, a prisoner says, "Here are ashes from the crematoria, American soldier. Remember what you saw here." He puts them in his metal cigarette case. Stays in his pocket, comes back to Western North Carolina. The metal cigarette case with the alleged ashes go in his nightstand. And that's where they stay. He passes away, and his son describes conversations with his father. Other fathers have war stories. How come you were just a pencil pusher? Pencil pusher, eh? Well, let me tell you what I saw. And he tells his son what he saw. The son transfers these alleged ashes from the metal cigarette case into a plastic box, and they continue to sit in the nightstand. He tries to give them to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. They say, "We don't take alleged human remains." A phone call is made to another phone call to a contact, and eventually Rabbi Feldman says, "There's Sharon Halperin and the North Carolina Holocaust Speakers Bureau. Maybe they'll talk to you about that." So let me acknowledge Sharon, the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, Debbie, Rose, and the others, Marinda, who I will show you a picture of, who's brought the ashes, and also I'll acknowledge Michael Roy, whose story I'm going to tell in a few minutes, and the monument. So Sharon goes to a Starbucks, and Marinda pushes a plastic box across the table, and Sharon brings it home. And I get out my camera, and I start taking pictures on the kitchen table. It's either looks like a piece of limestone or a piece of concrete. It seems to have some kind of circular area and an indentation and half a hole, and it's in a plastic box. So I turn my camera to the side and take another picture, and there's a flat surface and a raised surface, and it seems like it has a bend to it. And what did they teach Harold and I in medical school? It's pathology. You have to have a ruler in the image. So here's Sharon's ruler. And you can see it's about an inch in largest dimension. And much to Sharon's horror, I put it in my suitcase and take it to New York in my checked baggage. You did what? Put it in my suitcase. And I get to New York and I make a couple of calls. I need a collaborator. So my pathology department puts me in touch with the New York City Police Laboratory, the Office of the Medical Examiner of the City of New York. And this is on the east side of Manhattan. I'm just south of NYU Medical Center. Bellevue's up the street, and it is called the Milton Halperin Institute of Forensic Medicine. Its name is spelled differently than mine, but when I took pathology in medical school, it was still when they expected you to go to class. So they would read the roll call, and they would get through the C's and the D's and the F's and the G's and the H's, And all the pathologists would say Halperin, and I would say here, and they'd say, Milton's son? And I said, no, sir, it's H-A-L, not H-E-L, it's for, but he was very famous because anytime any mobster got rubbed out in New York, then on the evening news, you'd see medical examiner Halperin says. Then out of boredom, one day, one of the pathologists says, Halperin, I said, here. He said, Milton's son. I went,
Did you get an A?
Just to say,
So,
he wrote a
once-
memoir.
pardon me?
He wrote a memoir that helped inspire the series Quincy.
Quincy, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. So now I'm in upstairs after you get past the guards. It's a very sad place because you enter the lobby and the lobby is filled with people looking to identify bodies. Someone died in the subway, someone was found in a city park, someone was found and they don't have an identification, and so people come. So now I'm upstairs. Let me introduce you. This is Bradley Adams. This is Donald Siegel, and this is Kevin Alter. Kevin was a college student who was helping me on the project. Bradley Adams is a forensic anthropologist. A body washes ashore with no head, and you read in the newspaper, police say it's the body of a 15 to 25-year-old. The cause of death was a knife wound. It was a female, and you want to know how do they know that? That's what Bradley does. Dr. Siegel is a biochemist, and he is well known in these circles because he came up with a technique which will be relevant to our story of figuring out whether there were human remains in the ashes of 9/11 using a technique I'm going to describe to you. We x-rayed the fragment and it looked heterogeneous, but there's no obvious pieces of bone. And the biochemist told me, I'm not going to be able to find any DNA unless I can find some bone or marrow to go after, and I'll have to destroy the specimen to even look. So let's try the 9/11 technique on the surface. Surface is covered with human protein. How do we know it's not surface contamination from handling? We need to crack it in half and look in the middle. We need informed consent from the survivors to crack it in half. And I said, informed consent from the survivors. By the authority vested in me as Chancellor of New York Medical College, give it to me. And so you see our hands cracking it in half and taking specimens. And you can actually see Bradley Adams' work over here, bone identification on the table. The center was filled with human protein. Now, I can't tell you whether it's from one person or 20 people. I can't tell you whether these were Jews or Roma or Russian prisoners of war or political prisoners, gay and lesbian incarcerated people. I don't know. I can tell you it's human protein, hemoglobin, collagen. The technique is called proteomic mass spectrometry. So if you remember your chemistry, proteins are made of amino acids. There's an amino group, carboxyl group, and then this R group, which differs among the little more than 20 amino acids, is what decides which amino acid is proline, leucine, cysteine, cysteine, and you string them together and you've got a protein. So a protein you can sort of think of like a pop bead necklace that a child might have with these amino acids strung, and then they start folding upon themselves in secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structure. And in evolution, we share a lot of our proteins. You know, the joke, we've got 92% of our DNA is no different than a banana. Well, that's true for proteins, because proteins that make good bone, they make good bone. There's no reason for evolution to have made human bone proteins any different from that of a cow or a duck or a sheep. Once it's good compact bone, it's good bone. So what this bar graph is showing is shared proteins, horses, bats, cows, what's unique and what's shared. The takeaway message is a lot of our proteins are very common, and it takes a lot of sleuthing to show that it's likely human rather than not. Proteomic mass spectrometry is you take the protein, you denature it, and you fire it in a machine which ionizes it, and you see how it bends in magnetic fields. Okay, that's it for biochemistry for today, but I assure you it's a well-established technique to understand protein fragments. Okay, so it contains human protein. Now what am I supposed to do with it? Well, I consulted a couple of historians, including our own Bethel's Karen Shapiro. And Karen's comment was, well, you see how much trouble some museums have from displaying remains of indigenous tribes. You photograph it, you study it, but it should be buried. But more importantly, it's the Corsby family. This is Marinda, who I've thanked. This is Mr. Corsby, and obviously Sharon. And Mr. Corsby's, it's his material, it's not mine. Mr. Corsby says, I want it buried in sanctified ground, and I want to witness it. Okay, so that's what we do. I consult Rabbi Greyber because you've got apparently cremated remains for the Durham Hebrew Cemetery. The ruling is it's acceptable to bury them. And so in 2014, several hundred of us gather at the Durham Hebrew Cemetery. Here's Sharon as the master of ceremonies explaining what's going to happen. And here's the casket that was made by
Steve Herman.
Steve Herman, thank you. Steve Herman, a skilled woodworker, and he makes a casket for the ashes or human remains. And this is Mayor Bell. And I very clearly remember Mayor Bell. He says into the microphone, when you're a politician, they ask you to show up at things like this and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and then you leave, go to your next engagement. But I see what's going on here, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying for this. And I want to say that as mayor of Durham, I am honored that the town of Durham has some role to play in this story, and thank you very much for including me. So that evening I said to Sharon, well, we live in Chapel Hill, not Durham, but if he runs for election again, I'll send him a donation. Which I did. And when he finally retires from politics, I see an article in the paper and I write him a letter saying, there's no reason why you would remember me, but I remember that speech you gave in 2014. I want to wish you the best on your retirement, Your Honor. Got a letter right back. I remember that, what happened in 20, exactly. I have very strong memories of that. Thank you for remembering me. And you see Rabbi Greyber, Rabbi Feldman, Dave Clapper from the Hevra Kadisha, and you got a veterans group there, had the casket with an American flag, which they presented to the Corsbys. And a grave was dug, and this is Dave Clapper taking the casket, and some people filled with their hands, and some people used a shovel. And this is Rebecca Hauser, and there were several Holocaust survivors there, including Rebecca, and I heard comments like, I didn't get to bury my parents, I didn't get to bury, maybe this is some closure. This is Mike Israel. Mike Israel was the CEO of Duke Hospital when I was at Duke, and now he's the CEO at Westchester Medical Center across the street from New York Medical College, our teaching hospital. And the reason I'm showing you his slide is Michael listens to the story in 2014 and says, no one would mistake me for being religious. I'm not religious. But let me be sure I got this right. Of all the Starbucks in the world, it just happens to be the Starbucks where Sharon Halperin is. And Sharon Halperin just happens to be married to Edward Halperin, who just happens to be the only person I know who, when someone says these are ashes from the crematoria, and any normal person would say, yeah, they're ashes from the crematoria. You're the only person bizarre enough to say, oh no, let's take it to the New York City Police Laboratory and analyze it to see what it is. So I really don't think this is just a series of coincidences, Michael says, even though he says he's not religious. Sharon and the Speakers Bureau put out a request for proposals, and an agreement is struck with Mr. Roy, a Carborough artist, to make a monument, to have an unveiling 11 months later. So the community gathers. Mr. Roy has installed it on concrete footings over the grave. He's fabricated a dish for stones. You see Dave Clapper again. Sharon is the master of ceremonies. I see Abby Zarkin in the back. Rabbi Feldman's holding the microphone. This is Mr. Roy speaking about the artwork he had created to mark the location. I see Gary and Abby stand Raboy. And I turned my camera around taking pictures, and I took this candid picture of Sibby Sager to try to show you the emotion of people, both for the burial and for this. If you look at the expression on her face and the way she's holding her hand, staring at what's going on, it gives you some sense of what it felt like to be there. And the Speakers Bureau put up this descriptive plaque on the rusted fence of the cemetery to say what's buried there. And as the crowd left and the monument was unveiled, Rabbi Greyber and Rabbi Feldman, and that's what it looks like. And Sharon has brought some pictures and other things for those of you who are here that you might want to take a look at when I'm done about it. And what happens now? Well, if you go to the cemetery, there is a sign, Durham Hebrew Cemetery, and you encounter this flame-like monument which can rotate in the wind. So for the subsequent 8.5 years, I would take pictures of Sharon speaking to school groups. School teachers would bring children to the cemetery to have the story told of the Durham Dachau ashes and learn about it for their curriculum in Holocaust education. And that was the end of the story until it wasn't. And last fall, I said to Rabbi Greyber, I think I have something else to tell you, which is what I want to tell you now.
And I'll just interrupt to say that Miranda wanted to clarify. She says in a comment in the chat, I'm not a Corsby, the woman in the photo with Walter's son. My name is Amanda Kossoff, and my father was Jewish.
I stand corrected. I got an email from the biochemist last summer, and he said that the material that we studied in 2014, I've got some news for you. I found 4 other ones. They're in museums in Cape Town, South Africa, and in Yad Vashem. Here's the Durham fragment. If you measure the external diameter and the angle, it matches perfectly with these 4. The indentation matches perfectly with these 4. These 4 have numbers embedded in them. Can't see a number on ours. We found yet a 5th one. This one's in the State Museum for the Medina concentration camp. Now, Let's look at what the donors said when they gave these to the museums. He stated at the time he was told by Poles that it was covered in fat and used as soap that was given to those being sent to the gas chambers. No details. Described as a bar of soap. Found in Auschwitz, donated. Found in Illinois in flea market. It was a tag for left belongings given to Jews to deposit their belongings before entering the gas chambers. This is the one from Medinek. Found during excavations of Belzec. We think the Germans used them as a kind of receipt for valuable items which people brought them, part of the procedure before sending people to the gas chambers. Circumference is the same, indentation, hole. In fact, if you look at my dotted line here, this is the Durham fragment, front and back. See how it matches the hole? So if you got half a hole here. See? Yeah, it's a match. Okay, so we do biochemical analyses on 5 of these, what I'm now going to call discs. 2 are from Dachau, 3 are from Dachau, 1's from Orangeburg, 1's probably from Auschwitz. What do we know as historians? We know that the Germans are very concerned with how you get people into the gas chambers without stampedes, riots, or resistance. We know that in some camps, they tell prisoners, line your clothes up so you can find them when you come out of the shower. We have one eyewitness testimony saying there were coat hooks with numbers, and they told you to remember the number of your coat hook. And we have these descriptions, coat checks. Here's your little concrete coat check. You'll get your clothes when you come out. Or here's soap to use in the shower. You dip these, what appear to be pieces of concrete in fat and tell people it's soap. So you're going to get people off the trains into the gas chambers, and you're going to deceive them to do so. We know from history that there is a tradition of German crematoria tags in the 1930s when they're executing psychiatric patients and autistic and mentally retarded children, but they don't tell the parents they executed them, or the family, they say they died of typhus in the hospital, they died of infectious disease. That's why we had to cremate them. We know that they're using these little concrete crematoria tags with numbers, and you have to actually pay Hitler's government to get the ashes back, and they mail them to you. So these look like these crematoria tags, the original technology of the crematoria tags, but now we've got a story, coat checks, artifactual bars of soap. The proteomic mass spectrometry on all 5 discs show they're full of human protein. Most strongly for the Durham one, full of human protein, but all of them are full of human protein. And this is what a mass spectrometry looks like, the peaks for the various amino acids. Okay, they're full of human protein, like the one we buried, but they're hard like ours. And I said originally it felt like lime to me. They appear to be some kind of concrete full of human protein. So I start to think, is there such a thing as a professor of cement? Yeah, there is. There is. I'm going to learn all about concrete and cement. I contact the the Portland Cement Association of the United States. That's their logo. There really is such a thing. You know, my mother, she should rest in peace, taught me no matter what it is, there's an organization and there's a magazine. So I get the director of research on the phone from the Portland Cement Association, teach me all about this. And I call the chairman of the engineering program at Duke and I say, I'm an emeritus professor I am not a crackpot. I need to tell you a story about some research I'm doing. And you have a professor of concrete. Yes, we do. Cement 101 for civil engineering students. May I speak to her and tell her about this? So I describe to them this work. So for those of you who have not kept up with this old house, let's review. Portland cement is Portland cement. You mix Portland cement with sand, that's mortar for laying bricks. You mix water and Portland cement with gravel or stones, that's concrete. That's what you build with concrete. You fill your cement up with gravel, pebbles, and the real engineers don't call it gravel or pebbles, they call it aggregate. Whatever the material is, you add to the cement to extend it and make it stronger. And I found that in some resource compromised places in Africa where they don't have access to quarries and trucks and road systems, people try to make concrete out of animal bones as a source of aggregate because it's a ready source of calcium and they grind up the bones. It doesn't make very good concrete, not as good as pebbles, but people have been looking at it. And I learned from the professor that when the Allies start intensively bombing Germany, it's really easy to knock out a cement factory. Cement has a very methodical way of making it. The formula has not changed for 100 years, and you hit part of the production line, it's out the factory. And there's a shortage of concrete. The Germans are having trouble repairing their airstrips for the military, shortage of concrete. Okay, so we've got large numbers of people herded off the trains into the gas chambers. Evidence that these coat checks or bars of soap were used to deceive people to go into the gas chambers. We know from historical records the technique of numbered coat pegs, arrange your clothes, coat checks, tell people it's soap for the shower. Now we can put it all together. What are these concrete discs? What did we bury? We appear to have buried either a coat check or soap for the purpose of deceiving people to go into the gas chambers. But they're full of human protein. What caused them to be full of human protein all the way through to the middle? It appears that instead of pebbles, the Germans used human bone as aggregate to make the concrete. It's the only explanation for this, for the science. The Germans used human bone. The obvious source of the bone was from concentration camp victims. It was clearly plentiful. It required no transportation. They still clearly had no compunction about using human hair or human teeth. Why would they hesitate to use bone to manufacture concrete? That's the way I can tie the whole story together for you. That's what I wanted to tell you tonight. What we buried was likely a coat check or artifactual piece of soap. We buried human remains, but the human remains were for the manufacture of concrete. So in conclusion, in 2014, I told you that these ashes contain human protein. That's still true. It was buried following a ruling by Rabbi Greyber that the burial of cremated remains was appropriate. They're probably not cremated remains, but they're human remains. Well, they're cremated in the sense that the victims were cremated and then the bones ground up to make the concrete. I've told you about 4 other specimens of equivalent geometric configuration that contain human protein. They've been buried. I thought in 2014 they were compressed ashes from the crematoria. That was wrong. I think it's concrete, where our best judgment is that human bone was used as the aggregate. I presume it came from the concentration camp victims. Bone was plentiful. I cannot tell you if they were fabricated in the 30s or the 40s. It is also possible that in the crematoria, that these pieces of concrete were coated with ashes from the crematoria, which got ground into the surface over time. And they were most likely either coat checks or artifactual soap. Finally, the story today illustrates that anyone who says everything that needs to be said, written, or spoken about the Holocaust has been said or written about is wrong. New scientific techniques continue to aid our understanding of this era of history. Maybe the story I told you is a demonstration why we need universities like New York Medical College in Truro, where inquiries of this type are valued, and there are donors willing to finance this kind of work. If this topic interests you, if you want to grab a screenshot or take a picture, this is the report in Nature Scientific Reports last year of what I've showed you for the protein mass spectrometry. This is the article Rabbi Greyber alluded to in the New York Times. This is an article that Kevin and I wrote after the burial in 2014 with what we knew at that time. Once again, I thank Amanda, and I thank Mr. Roig, and I thank Sharon and the Speakers Bureau and Rabbi Greyber for the invitation. Thanks for listening. And I thought a good way to begin the discussion would be to ask Rabbi Greyber to serve as a respondent to this. He's had a chance to see some of these slides in advance and see what he has to say, and then I'm happy to talk about it. Thank you.
Yasher Koach.
So I want to say a few things. Ed, while you were speaking, one of the things I was doing is going through some old emails to find I do have the email contact of the director of Yad Vashem, and I realized I don't know whether she's aware of this story, but I certainly want to put it in front of her. So today is 1 year since, to the English day, since Rabbi Sager passed away. And in the wake, I've been thinking a lot about him, and he and I got to discussing this story as it unfolded. And one of the questions that we were tossing around at the time was, and I think you understand we were talking about this in a deeply respectful way, but the question was, after this burial of the ashes had taken place, if somehow we found out that it wasn't human remains, would it matter? In other words, that day of the burial was a deeply meaningful day, when, as you said, there were hundreds of survivors, hundreds of people, many of whom had lost relatives in the Holocaust, many of whom had lost relatives in Dachau, who came to our cemetery and had the opportunity to take dirt and to place it into the ground and to find some measure of closure after having gone a lifetime without ever being able to bury a loved one. I'm reminded of a story of a colleague of mine who was performing a funeral, and somebody exclaimed, how beautiful this is, and it took my friend who's a rabbi, it took their breath away, and he realized that this was a Holocaust survivor who was saying what a treasure it is that we are able to bury our loved ones. Right? Something that I think we take for granted. And Rabbi Sager and I sort of, played with that question, right? Is the meaning somehow changed? Is it different if if all of those things were present, and I want to almost say the kedusha, right, was placed, was given to this artifact, whether or not it was. And there's a parallel story. I don't want to take us too far afield, but there's a parallel question you can ask about the Exodus from Egypt. Scholars, there is a school of scholars who say the Exodus may not have happened. Maybe the Jews in the land of Israel arose from tribes who were already there, and other people, Richard Elliott Friedman among them, says no, it may not have been exactly as you hear in the Bible with all the numbers and everything, but there was a historical kernel there, and that's important. And I think to bring it back as a response to your presentation, to the work that you've done over so many years, I think that the thing that resonates with me so much is the deep belief that history matters, that it does matter. And whether it is because we have a deeper sense of the villainy which was committed by deceiving groups of people, by knowing that this artifact was used, that human remains were taken and then re-enlisted into wicked purposes to create more human remains to bring more people to their death. But that it matters terribly what happened, and my reaction is that we live in a world where that is under assault. And I'm speaking not only of the Holocaust, where ignorance of what happened in the Holocaust is rampant and terrifying, but also where just generally the study of history is, not valued in universities, and where generally the idea of truth and facts is under assault, that everything is just a series of opinions. And this sort of, and it has been said in many ways that the Jewish tradition, the version of the Ten Commandments that we have, God introduces God's self to the Jewish people, does not say, I am the Lord who created the heavens and the earth. That's not the way that God introduces God's self. God says, I am the one who took you out of the land of Egypt. I am God who entered history and participates in history. And that the Jewish tradition, perhaps our greatest contribution in terms of theology, is understanding God not as being the unmoved mover, as sort of a great force of physics, but actually a God who is invested in history and in what happens in this world. And history matters, and memory matters. And the story that you've told us, this weaving story of finding the professors of concrete and the medical examiner's office and Holocaust museums in South Africa and Majdanek, and going to all of these places is not only worth it, but there's something central there that to me just feels like all of civilization in some way depends upon it. So I'm deeply grateful. I'm humbled to have been a little observer and to have played a small part in how all of this unfolds. And I will say to Sharon, the work which you do in bringing the kids of our community couldn't be more important at this time. I wish that I could tell you that, well, I'm just going to share with you, I'm going literally from here over to the home of one of our Bethel members whose child has been dealing with anti-Semitism in our local high schools. That's where I'm going from here. And unless we continue to invest the resources to study history and to teach history, and if left alone, ignorance will prevail. So.
Thank you, Rabbi. Before we go to general discussion, Sharon, anything you want to add either about what you brought or anything about this?
Thank you for asking me. What I'm worried most about is that we rectify the signage at the cemetery to reflect the accuracy of what you've uncovered. I do not want Holocaust deniers or revisionists to say, this is not true. What you have buried here are not ashes. So how can we fix this?
If we're consistent with the story I told about evolving science, I think the safest approach is a QR code, which could be updated over time. So if we put a QR code there and someone can come by saying, you want to see up-to-date information on research here, grab a screenshot of this and it'll take you to Professor Siegel's article or to an explanation of this. And if there is more research, either I or the next person, 9 years from now stands up and says, now we understand something else about it, there'll be more to be told. But I think that would be the best way.
If I can, yes, we can do that. And I want to, Sharon, the answer to your question is, the Holocaust revisionists are not going to care about a QR code. The people who want to pervert this story are going to pervert the story. What we need to do is to continue to do the right things and to argue passionately with the same passionate zeal of those on the extremes. We need a passionate middle that will argue there is a place for science, there is a place for reason. And so absolutely, we do the technological fix, but I also, behind your question, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that you're not going to win an argument with a Holocaust revisionist with an article in Nature magazine. They're not going to read it.
I think we also have to think about the word ashes. If you cremate someone and grind up their bones and make it into concrete, still ashes. It's, whether we refer to what we did in 2014 was burying ashes, burying human remains, burying concrete, which contained human ashes, which contained human remains, I think it's all the same. These are, and that's what the science points to. There was, I see, let's start in the room. There was a hand out next to Harold. Yeah, I'm going to have to walk towards you, sir, because I don't hear very well. So let me get to that end of the room, so I'm sure I can hear you.
Yeah, and Sharon, thanks so much for your discussion.
And for people on Zoom, I will repeat the question.
I'm really struck by something that seems quite ironic to me, and that is here we have the Nazis trying to eliminate and exterminate all Jews and eradicate the Jewish civilization, and yet have effectively created a material, structural memory of the Jews that is now almost like it could be erasing like a fetish, actually use Jewish bones and create a talisman or something as an image, but also it's here the Nazis eventually are wiped out themselves, and yet here is a structural, a solid symbol of the Jews still persisting. So in a way, it could be seen as in a hopeful way, and not just a tragic thing.
And as you come back over here, I probably, forgive my paraphrasing, but just the observation that the Nazis sought to eradicate the Jews, and yet a memory of the Jews persists in concrete. And perhaps there's something hopeful there.
Perhaps. Let me take what you said and run with it for about 30 seconds. After I presented some of this data at my university in New York, someone said, was it confined to these discs? Is it possible that relatives that I lost in the Holocaust are part of the concrete for a German building, a German road, a German driveway? Is that entirely plausible? In the same way that gold teeth that were taken from concentration camp victims was melted and reused. I have no idea how bad this story would continue to be.
But it also means that
we certainly know, those of you if you read something called the Vienna Protocol, this is because they continue to unearth caches of bones. They dig a subway in Berlin. They are working on a sewer system. They come across bones in the area near the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, where it was located, or near a neuroscience institute. Whose bones were they? What are they doing down here? What should be done with them? Story may be even worse than these discs, perhaps. Yes, Laura.
Are these discs the only known use of human bone in concrete of World War II in Germany? I mean, is this the only example of that?
To my knowledge, yes, Laura. That the question was, are these discs the only known use of human bones? Could one go out, Laura, and say, I want historical records to show me what roads were built in the proximity of these concentration camps using concrete. I want to start chipping samples from them and start looking for human remains. One could try to run with this scientifically and see how bad this is, or where else you would find human protein. But you've seen what I know so far, the museums chose to bury their discs after this paper was published. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to speak to, it's not a question, but I just want to give the audience of, well, everyone assembled here and on Zoom, a little perspective, because of course I love the idea about the QR code updating it. It's the proper thing to do, but this is so valuable. I did not live here. I was not here in 2014. I didn't live here at the time, but I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, and this large Landsmannschaft that my parents belonged to in New York City, the Radama Mutual Society, at our cemetery on Long Island, there is a cenotaph. And the cenotaph is a monument that was erected around 1962, I believe. I'm going to be there in October. I'm not sure I'll find the answer to that, and it has for everybody who was in New York or elsewhere in North America who wanted to have the names of their family members inscribed on this. It's rather large, and that's what it is. And that was the only closure that all of these Holocaust survivors had. And they understood it was not human remains, it was not their family, but it was as close as they could get. It was a visual. I could tell you that if, I don't believe there's a single survivor left. My aunt in Paris died 3 days before her 100th birthday a year ago. She may have been the last of that group, of that cohort. But for those Holocaust survivors, this burial, whether you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, it was human remains of concentration camp victims. That's what matters. To be hair splitting, the deniers, I agree with the rabbi, the Holocaust deniers are not even going to come around and start hair splitting. Well, is this, what is this, how accurate is it? It's accurate. You've proven it to us. It's human remains, and that's the value of it. And that can't be denied to any thinking person. And I just share this history with you because it's something that I grew up, and my older brother and I, and many of our generation in New York, the children of these, we grew up and we understood and the value of this. The great grandchildren of all of these survivors, we are now inculcating them in this, and so history is being carried forth. And I don't know about the other Radama societies in Los Angeles, and it was small. New York was the large one, and that was the value. And there was actually one person, not a family member of ours, who was the inspiration for this and who was the driver of that, and he too is deceased. Anyhow, thanks for letting me share.
Yes, Susan.
I'm wondering about the burial of the other four. Were they all buried together? And the other part of the question is, how did they handle it? Did they do it similar to the way we did it in the Durham Cemetery? I mean, is there a monument or a plaque or a statue?
I don't know. All I know is one of the professors I contacted said, there are techniques that engineers have where you can bounce various forms of light off the concrete, and I can tell you some things about it that would be done in addition to the proteomic mass spectrometry. And when I inquired, they said, oh, too late. They both in South Africa and Israel, they've been buried. But I don't know anything about the specifics of the burial. I see Michael Roy on. Michael, is there anything you want to say about the monument or the story you've heard? You have to unmute yourself. No, Stephen online has a question.
Yes, greetings from New Haven, Connecticut. I just wanted to congratulate the Holocaust Speakers Bureau down there and my cousin Sharon Halperin and you, Ed, for all your efforts to make sure that this awfully sad piece of history wasn't lost to the greater history, and that it had a respectful ending back in 2014 through your all great efforts, and then that you update the story for us today so that we could be reminded about this not far from Holocaust Remembrance Day. So thank you. I suppose I speak for everybody who's listening to you tonight. So thank you so much for taking care.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, we have a comment in the room, please.
I have a question actually with the Speakers Bureau. Is there any relationship with the Chapel Hill Public Schools to incorporate any kind of Holocaust education in the curriculum? You're smiling like, get real.
Hey, you were making eye contact towards me. You should be turning 90 degrees to your left. And you've got
No, that's
sort
what I was
of...
saying. I was looking at, and she was looking at me like, get real, Audrey.
No, thank you for the question. Yes, we're in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, Cary, Raleigh, Wake Forest. We even go to Wilmington. We go to Montana via Zoom. Yes, we are vibrant. We are thriving.
And the school system, it's not just like one-on-one. Is there any official?
Huge
collab-
classes, yes.
Okay.
And we're blessed, the North Carolina legislature passed a mandate that Holocaust education be performed for every middle and high school public school student. So beginning in 2023, it's gonna be a mandate. So hopefully our speakers will be going into classrooms.
I have to add to that. So we live close to the school for the arts, the high school for the arts in Durham. And I walk by there sometimes on the way to the bread store. So I go by their playground area around noon fairly frequently. So just the other day, I was walking by and one of the girls there was reading a fairly substantively serious book, you know, a real book, not a textbook or something like that. And so I asked her what she was reading, and it was one of the Holocaust memoirs. So, yeah.
I couldn't,
Thank you.
Bob, were you raising your hand or something? No. Other comments or questions in the room or online, please?
Let me close just by saying again, a deep, deep thanks to you, and to everyone who has helped to do this research, to learn the history, to learn one more horrifying element of something that both defies description and demands our efforts to remember and record and pass on history and memory to the future. So thank you.